preparatory work and including circumstances. When a treaty is negotiated, sometimes you see there is a long drawn out process of treaty making. The point is this: the treaty, even the legislation is not enacted in a day. There are several things, certainly the circumstances which are existing prior to the enactment of a legislation and also of a treaty. Several sessions, sometimes several years, you see, which elapse before a treaty is adopted. There is no one form of what is known as preparatory work. Work, in its generic sense, means literary work, as you understand in the law of copyright. Literary work, and some of these forms, which are very well known, and you find them in use often in your studies. One is that the record of negotiation. And record of negotiations, which also include minutes of meetings. This is called minutes of meetings, which means minutes are always not नहीं तेजो तो छोड़ दो. I will speak. मुझे ज़्यादा सही लगेगा because I find it very difficult.
पहले से टेस्ट क्या करोगे? लेक्चर से पहले क्या करना है?
इसको आप छोड़ दो. मैं ज़्यादा मुझे ठीक लगेगा. मुझे सामने now minutes. Sometimes you see, let me tell you some of these more informally. A meeting is convened. Sir might tell you several times. A meeting of deans, meetings of you see vice chancellors, and those meetings are convened. And you find that in those meetings, once the meeting is over, then the question arises as to the deliberations which have taken place. Now, minutes are of two kinds. Minutes which are in verbatim record. Verbatim record means each and every word which is spoken in the meeting, that is authenticated at the end. But let me also tell you, with a pinch of salt, the minutes of a meeting which is a verbatim record. Verbatim records are also presented for participations for their participants for their authentication. Because when you speak, sometimes you miss a particular word. Once you have spoken, then you realize this is not the word that I wanted to speak, and I would not like to be on record as to what I have spoken. Then the verbatim record is reduced from oral recording into written recording, given to each participant for correction. Once each participant will find one comma, one full stop, one verb or something like that. That is the records of all these things is taken as verbatim. One is like that. The second is in the form of decisions, which is obviously less, you see, original. In minutes of the meetings, you get everything what has been spoken. In the minutes which are merely declaratory of deliberations, summative of decisions taken. They are basically, let me tell you, a very simple common minutes. Like an interview is to be convened, faculty is to be, a teacher is to be appointed, selection committee is there, you interview everybody, 4-5 persons. And then after that, there is a deliberation discussions among selectors. Who is to be selected and who is not to be selected. They have decided we have to select 3 persons. So that is known as minutes of the selection committee held on such and such date, selected 1, 2, 3, and everybody will sign. So one is basically this kind of a minutes. Or a new syllabus is to be approved, academic council can meet. So this is basically, these are the minutes. Similarly, these are the minutes. If you see the drafting, the minutes of verbatim records of conventions, several conventions, Genocide Convention for instance, Vienna Convention, Sale of Goods, Vienna Convention, Law of Treaties, you find that what has been spoken by each and every state through its representative is basically recorded there. So you actually know what had transpired in the minds of those who had negotiated the treaty. Sometimes a treaty text, you see, you just try and understand. How many of you have read political science and have heard of Jean-Jacques Rousseau? I'm sure you are aware of Rousseau, one of the best known philosophers of the age of enlightenment from France. The theory of social contract, the theory of general will. He had, you see, referred to, and that is very important analogy here in order to understand it. He referred to 3 wills: general will, real will, actual will. Actual will, what he says is, the wills of each and everybody. Let us see if 100 participants participated in a treaty. So each wills of each and every participant, what each and every participant wanted the Vienna Convention treaty interpretation rule to be. Positions of each and every will. Then second is the real will. The real will is one, what Rousseau says, what each and every participant should have willed, but did not will. It's a moral element here, which actually there is no verification of this, because what he has spoken is the evidence of actual will. But what Rousseau is saying, what you should have willed in the interest of the community. And then general will is what? The majority, the common will of all. You can say general will as if the adopted text of Vienna Convention on general rule or whatever. So in order, if there is any gaps in the general will or in the adopted text, sometimes the text is not very clear. We will see through several illustrations that the treaty text is not clear. Then it is possible, it is necessary, if there are records, that the interpreter might refer back to the negotiating history, that is preparatory work, to understand, to get into the minds of those who negotiated the treaty. This is one. Then second is report of rapporteurs. Rapporteurs are usually appointed by the body which is entrusted with the task of negotiating a treaty. You have Waldock, Professor Waldock, you had several others, you see, Professor Roberto Abu, you had several in the context of Vienna Convention. Now these persons, what they do? These persons basically, the task is to combine the views of all member countries and present it in the form of the result of the particular session, what had happened. So the task is of twofold: to give as close as possible representation of actual views of all participants and his own view, which is actually combining the views of others. So the task of putting glue into the views of all others, this is the task basically of the deputy task. His task is, if I should quote one author who had, you see, once commented on the chairperson of any big body. He says it is the task of a German shepherd to bring together all sheep. So that is also a very important task. So there is a report. There is a report of the report. And this report is sometimes useful in, you see, getting into the minds of negotiators when you will see in the Article 32, the interpretation that is arrived at by reference to Article 31 is absurd or unreasonable. Then there are guidelines. Guidelines in the form of existing provisions of the parties. For instance, when you move from one session to another session, let us see GATT and WTO negotiations. So you had existing guidelines. For instance, let us see if you are negotiating, like currently, if I should give you a real example. Currently, there are negotiations which are on preferential rules of origin in the auspices of WTO. Now, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that there exist no rules of origin. There do exist rules of origin. What they are negotiating preferential rules of origin. So, what does it mean? Suppose in due course, when they agree on preferential rules of origin, and they have particular agreement in 3, 4, 5 sentences, 4, 5 pages, and if they fail to understand some of these, then they will get back to what had existed prior to their agreeing on the special preferential rules of origin. That is called existing guidelines, and we will see in the course of our examples the exact examples of these guidelines. Then let us see the forms of concluding circumstances. No legislation, no treaty is negotiated in a vacuum. Treaties are negotiated by human beings for human beings, and human beings are conditioned by the circumstances in which they live, they think, they negotiate, they talk, they concede, they agree, they disagree. So human being is both, you say, a cause of his or her own circumstances, yet at the same time also an agent to condition those circumstances. You condition and are conditioned by circumstances. Now, in the context of treaties and statutes, what are these? Existing relevant relations. When you say, well, Dowry Prohibition Act is not enough, imagine when Domestic Violence Act was negotiated, drafted, 2005. It was not as though there did not exist any provisions on that particular subject. Yes, they existed, but they were not found to be sufficient. So they were existing, circumstances. Second is existing relevant legislations. For instance, you had provision in the Indian Penal Code in the context of Domestic Violence Act, in the context of intellectual property rights, for instance. Before TRIPS agreement, existing legislations, treaties were, Berne Convention, Paris Convention, the Stockholm Convention. So these are existing legislation, existing treaties, norms, regulations, and or practices, whatever it is. Then objectives and reasons for conclusion. This is less formalized, in the context of treaties than is the case in domestic legislation, especially of the common law type. For instance, if you see any Indian treaty or any Indian legislation statute, you would find, if you see the bill is always with a statement of objects and reasons. Most recently, if I should refer you to a statement of objects and reasons, I would refer you to the statement of objects and reasons which had accompanied that judicial accountability bill. Just read that, paragraph 6 or 5, if I correctly remember. For giving greater transparency and accountability. Independence, accountability, transparency. These three words are very critical. So here you find, sometimes when you don't find any other guidance to interpret a provision that you find to be vague or ambiguous, then these statements of objects and reasons become very important. In the domestic law, the manner in which in the domestic law this subject is taught, you call it by external aids to interpretation. A statement of objects and reasons. It's called an external aid to interpretation. Why? Because this is considered external to the enacted. External is with reference to enacted. So what has not been enacted, statements and objects and reasons are not enacted. They are attached to what is enacted, but they themselves are not enacted. And therefore they are usually called external aids to interpretation. As far as international law is concerned, as far as Vienna Convention is concerned, Vienna Convention makes no reference to anything like internal or external. It makes no such reference.
Sir, does treaty have these objects and reasons clause like we have domestic bills?
I am not able to hear you.
Sir, does treaty have these objects and reasons clause?
Not as such. There is no such form as to any international treaty which says that it must be accompanied by a statement of object and reason. The principle of statement of objects and reason is a typical of a common law legislation. Typical of, I mean, if I should give you two examples, you see, I mean, number of examples: British treaties, UK treaties, Indian treaties, South African treaties, Kenyan treaties, Malaysian treaties. You will find this. Legislations, you will find this. As far as treaties are concerned, I am making a loose comparison, only a loose comparison. That you will find in the preamble. But again, there is a difference. Substantively, there is a comparison, because what usually you find in a statement of object and reason is what you find in a preamble. That is the objectives. If unless otherwise stated in a treaty, for instance, TRIPS agreement, you find a statement as to objectives in separate provisions. For instance, Article 7 and Article 8, TRIPS agreement. But at the same time, you also find these in the preamble. But there is a marked difference between the two. The difference is preamble is an enacted part. And preamble is usually present also in legislations, less usual than in treaties. It is highly unusual for a treaty to be without a preamble. But there is no, I am not aware of any such, prerequisite for a formal treaty under international law to be necessarily with a preamble.
But sir, if preamble is not present, then long title is used.
Then long title is used in domestic interpretation. Well, long title is used, that is also a very loose reference. I can give you quickly an example. Kerala Education Bill. Kerala Education Bill was one case that went to Supreme Court of India on the long title. The court found it to be usually of use as an external aid, as an internal aid. But preamble is more authoritative, is more useful than statement of objects and reasons. The point is this: you go to a statement of objects and reasons only after having considered the preamble, 1. 2. Having also found the preamble to be insufficient to dispose of the problem before you. The reason is very simple. The interpreter carries a burden to discharge and verify it. Then why did he go outside of the treaty? And outside, in the case of legislation, outside of the legislation. Preamble is part of the legislation. I mean, I did not cite you example. If you really need citations, Kesavnanda Bharti is the best citation. There is no need. It is there. It is part. You don't have. There some few things are so common sense that you don't need any references. But a statement of object and reasons, I am not aware of any statute where I could find a statement of object and reasons to be an enacted part. This is outside of enactment. So you have to say that, well, I have referred to everything what was enacted, but that was found to be insufficient to dispose of the interpretive problem, and only then reference was made to statement of objects and reasons. Now let us see the importance. And here you have just one statement by one of the best known judges, especially in the context of judicial review, that you know, Justice Marshall of the United States Supreme Court, more famous for Marbury versus Madison. But then here also in this particular case, he said what is quoted here, that where the mind labors to discover the design of the legislature, it seizes everything from which aid can be derived. You see, let me tell you the context in which he said it. And I should pick up the point from where I left it. A statement of object and reason, or parallel to the concept of preparatory work in the international law, there is a concept of legislative history in the domestic law. The fundamental disagreement among scholars and judges who have studied the subject is that legislative history is not an enacted part. This is the biggest problem. So if you allow an easy reference and reliance on legislative history, what you allow is a non-democratic reference, non-democratic source, or more loosely conditioning of law. Legislative history is not voted upon by the legislators. It is not a legislative work. It is legislative history, but it is not a legislative work. It is a work of those which are appointed by the legislators for recording their history. But by that alone, it does not. It is not, it cannot be anything called legislative. It is not legislative. That is the biggest problem. But at the same time, if the judge believes that yes, there is something very useful in the legislative history, or to put it more markedly, in the absence of any reference to legislative history, the judge finds himself or herself unable or completely equivocal as to two permissible interpretations, but with two drastic consequences. And we will see in the examples that follow. We will get back to it. This is here just to, you see, provoke your mind. Then Aristotle said it. What he said was this: it was impossible for the legislator to find a universal statutory language to cover every case that might arise. Subsequent circumstances can render the legislation defective. That is also true. This is not, you see, a legislation is directed also to the future. But a legislative piece, a legislation is not an enumeration of a future facts. It is a definition rather than an inventory of facts. It is not possible for any legislation to be an inventory of facts. So even after having seen 10 descriptions of certain things, then it would also say, or any other thing of this kind, or any other such thing, or like, or etc. And then you have those principles, you see, nocitur associ, and you see, wisdom generis. Those kinds of presumption, well, whether this is to be included or this is not. That is precisely an admission. And it is not possible for an abstract language that is bound to be of a legislation to be stative of every future thing that it intends to cover. Now let us see the formulation of the Vienna Convention. And this statement must be most important, you see, for you, because this is the treaty language. So please read each and every word most carefully. Now, supplementary means of interpretation, that is what Article 32 is captured. The first, you see, I think unless you all agree and you know it, I did not elaborate. I would like to say a few things about supplementary and means. Because they are different from what the general and rule is. This is not complementary, this is supplementary. Do you know the difference between supplementary and complementary? Because there are two complementaries. One is a PLI and another is PLE. Which one are we using? I1 or E? E, that is correct. Now, the difference between supplementary and complementary.
Is it like supplementary means one substituting the other and complementary means in addition to, along with?
No, you see, your second description is correct of supplementary. Supplementary means in addition to. Put it contrarily, in the absence of what has been supplemented to, the supplemented to is otherwise complete. If it had been complemented to, that means what has been complemented to in the absence of would have been incomplete. So something is complementary which without it would remain incomplete. Something is supplementary which without it would still be complete. Now if you have this in mind, just get back to the Vienna Convention. Article 31 is a complete rule of interpretation. So Article 32 is intended, at least by the literal meaning, the grammatical, simple, ordinary meaning of supplementary, is not incomplete. Vienna Convention rule is complete. But then, again, what is supplementary in the Vienna Convention in the context of norms on interpretation is not a rule, it is a means. Again, that you find it, it is not a rule, it is a means. And then these means themselves are not complete, are not sufficient. So these things you just be just these things. Whether or not the understanding of this particular rules would testify to our literal understanding of the word supplementary. Please note this understanding. I am not saying that our understanding of supplementary rule means would necessarily testify to our understanding of the common sense, literal meaning of the word supplementary. Because look at the content of the rule. What does it say? First, you refer to supplementary means for two purposes. First, to confirm the meaning resulting from the application of Article 31, or to determine the meaning when the interpretation according to Article 31 leaves the meaning ambiguous or obscure, or leads to a result which is manifestly absurd or unreasonable. Just get back to where we started. To confirm, to determine. What does it mean? As far as the statement of this particular article in the Vienna Convention, again to employ grammatical interpretation. To me, applying grammatical interpretation, it sounds to me that supplementary rules is a necessary rule. Supplementary means is a necessary means. Because even if you are shocked that Article 31 rule interpretation is all right, there is no problem, but you still use supplementary means to confirm it. So there is a confirmatory. And of course, the second one is understandable. Second one is under those circumstances where 31 is insufficient. 31 is failing you. And then there are two ways of failing which have been contemplated. One is failing by providing an ambiguous or obscure meaning, or second by giving you a meaning which is absurd or unreasonable. So you see, where you find pink dots, they are basically forms of failing. But again, when you see two paragraphs, if you make a combined reading of two paragraphs, to me, again grammatically speaking, supplementary rules in its content is a necessary rule. It doesn't sound to be a supplementary means, because you have to use it also to confirm. So even if you say 31 is complete, but then you have to confirm it. The only point that you can say is, those who interpret legislation, they are not basically discharging their duties as professors of law. They are basically settling the disputes. So even when they are referring to 32, they do not say, I have referred to 31, I believe 31 is complete, but I have referred to 32 because this is necessary. You have to actually cull it out. Sometimes this process is discernible. Sometimes this process is not discernible. This is not always the case that you find it. So that is why I said it earlier, that the literal meaning of supplementary may not be corroborated by the content of 32. Because 32 says that it is to be employed either to confirm or to determine. In other words, it is to be employed always. And if it is to be employed always, that means it is not a supplementary. It means it is a necessary. Whether or not meanings of supplementary necessary, there is some element into it, because if it is supplementary, which means it is not necessary. 31 itself is complete. So here in this particular set, there is one final remark in the approach, which is domestic approach to interpretation and international law. International law approach is more practical approach. And domestic law approach is more mechanical approach. That if this happens, then you do this. If this is external, this is internal. With internal is discharge, external is not. This is not such a case. So the exercise is far more, you see, compact and common sense and practical on the international claim than on the domestic. Now, unless you have preliminary questions on this,
But sir, this type of interpretation leaves too much discretion in the hands of judges.
say it again.
Sir, this type of interpretation.
Which type?
International law type of interpretation leaves too much discretion in the hands of judges.
How?
Sir, because there are only two articles dealing with interpretation.
And what about domestic law, which will not give any discretion to judges? Are you aware of any such domestic law rule?
There is no domestic law as such, but there are conventions and there are judicially made laws related to interpretation.
Like? Just tell us. How many classes have you attended?
Sir, this is my second class.
Second class?
Yes.
All right. So which means that you have missed 8 classes?
Yes.
Yes. So please tell us. We
Sir,
will be very grateful.
Sir, like in Indian law, we
Yes.
read different types of interpretation.
Yes.
So there are detailed rules. So there,
Yes.
but still there is somewhat.
What are those detailed rules? Just tell us. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Sir, internal aids, external aids to interpretation.
They will not give you any discretion.
There is a certain discretion in the hands of judges to prefer which type of.
You need to read this subject more carefully. You spend some time and read it. Because this is not possible, because your general comment requires me to reflect on several other lectures on which we have spent considerable time. We have given lots of illustrations, and there are readings which have been sent to you, all of you, and all those readings are there, so you will find out from them, and you will benefit a lot. Because if you have a precise question, I'll be more than happy to respond.
Let me ask him. It's a very interesting observation he has made. I wish he had attended all the lectures, and if he had still made this observation, I would have certainly felt more confident about your observation. I'm slightly uncertain about your observation, and we want to give an opportunity to elaborate, because it's a very important observation, even if it is not very authentic. You make a very strong, not very strong, you make a very important observation that under domestic law, judges have lesser discretion than interpreters under international law. Am I correct, or this is what you wanted to say? You wanted to say. And then you offered a reason for that. The reason is even more provocative than the observation. The reason you gave was that there are so many guidelines. What term did you use?
Conventions.
Challenge.
Judicial decisions.
Judicial decisions. To be very honest, and it's for the sake of only to understand, because my knowledge of law of interpretation of domestic law is very poor in fact. International law I can claim a little bit of familiarity. If we ask you to cite some cases which you consider leading cases on the law of interpretation, which cases we should read?
Like saying we have mystic rule. We have mystic rule of interpretation.
What is the chief rule of interpretation?
Sir, in mystic rule of interpretation, we determine 3 things: like what was law before enactment, what was a mistake which was thought to be resolved.
I understand. No, can you cite a case where you think the judicial what you call judicial guideline or regulation which we can use as a reference to understand the law of interpretation?
So I don't remember any specific case, but it is a penal laws.
So I can
and
understand
tax.
it. Why don't you take some time and get back to us? You can send this reference by email also.
Yes.
Because you made very let's give him an opportunity to
Yes.
explore it.
You see, and we should be very grateful if you
Yeah,
send us
we would
those
certainly appreciate.
conventions.
The idea is to know from, it's quite possible that you may have come across some cases which you consider are very authoritative pronouncements on the law of interpretation. I want to know what are those leading cases. You see, on every important matter you have a leading case. For instance, death penalty. Which is a leading case?
Purchase in limit to
Purchase. On basic feature of Constitution of India,
some
due process of law.
medical.
So you have some leading cases that you can quickly cite when you deal with a particular legal matter. I'm very keen to find out from you, and you take your time. There is no need to tell it right now. It's not a quiz which you have to answer in 30 seconds, otherwise your opposite party will be declared winner. You take your time and bring to our notice, our attention, what are those cases? Because your whole emphasis is on the contribution of judges under domestic law to lay down some judicial conventions that are the basis of very objective and less subjective law of interpretation. Because so far we are trying to understand is that international law offers more objective tools of interpretation than domestic law. This was our belief was, because domestic law of interpretation, I don't know where that law exists. I have yet to see that law. But your emphasis on decisions of the courts, please let us know as soon as possible. Maybe.
By next week.
Why do you want to wait for next week? Yeah, we can now. So by next week means by Monday you do it. You send it by email, and we would love to see what your cases you have in mind after your study, which you would like to cite as leading cases on the law of interpretation. Very good. As for your observation is concerned, I wish you had seen you have heard or you have listened to various examples that were given. I would be reluctant to say, without a very detailed study, that there is greater flexibility on the part of interpreters of international law than on the part of interpreters of domestic law. If you look at Article 21, the way it is interpreted, I'm not sure whether you would like to uphold your own view, the way Article 21 is interpreted, Article 21 of the Constitution of India. You would still like to maintain your view after seeing interpretation of Article 21, the way it has been interpreted since right from the beginning?
But sir, then Article 21 would become dead later if it is not interpreted in tune with times. So due to progress, due to developments, modern developments, Article 21 has been interpreted again and again by Supreme Court.
No, we are not talking of that it is interpreted for bad purposes. What we are trying to understand is whether you still believe that judges under domestic law have lesser discretion to interpret law than judges under international law with the help of the illustration of Article 21. Just reflect on it. My impression is, I'm trying to give my impression, and I would welcome you to come out with a different view and take your time. There's no need to do it immediately. Thoughts are evolved, you may reflect on it. My impression is, at least when it comes to appreciation of facts, correlating facts with circumstances and law, these three things, when these three things come, domestic courts have a lot of discretion. Imagine, compare the procedures first. I will tell you the procedure. International bodies have lesser degree of flexibility when it comes to procedure. Ravindraji?
Yes, sir. That's
I'm bringing a new dimension to the degree of flexibility in interpretation. I feel that procedure plays a very important role when it comes to the law of interpretation. If a forum has more means and more authority to exercise its discretion in procedural matters, then it has greater discretion in interpretation matters. You understand what I'm trying to say? I correlate flexibility in respect of interpretation with flexibility in respect of procedure. You got the point? We are not talking of law of interpretation. We are talking of procedural law that is deployed by a forum to deal with a case. And when it comes to domestic courts, they have tremendous amount of discretion when it comes to procedure. For instance, a forum can call anybody as a witness. Forum can direct any party to impeach any party.
See, the fundamental principle is there is no vested right in the procedure. That is number one. And a very good case study you would do, Rani Kusum versus Kanchan Devi, 2002, Justice Arijit Pasayak's judgment.
The reality is that if you have more freedom in procedural matters, you have more freedom in interpretation matters. In case of international tribunals, courts, they are very constrained when it comes to procedure. They can't. They are very limited. For instance, if you file a case against another state, court can't say that you should also separate another state as a party. You can file a case only against one state, and another state need not to come before the court. The state can simply say that I don't want to appear before the court, and there is no authority on the part of international tribunal to compel a state to appear before it. There is no contempt of court. You can't marshal witnesses. You can't enter territory of the state without the permission of that state to collect evidence. Fact finding is based on consent. These kind of limitations don't exist when it comes to domestic law. So, it is possible that in some matters, you may say that discretion is limited. For instance, discretion is limited when it comes to interpretation of a legislation in light of constitution, for instance. In that sense, you may say so. But when you come to the question of interpretation of constitution itself, the way Article 21 is interpreted, as I told you, is a classic case of no limits. Judges they have reformulated the constitution by interpreting Article 21. And Justice Bhagwati always feels very enlightened that he has done it, or others have done it. So revisit your view on 2 points. One, please enlighten us about the cases that you consider are the leading cases on the law of interpretation where one can find the law. And second, this hypothesis that judges under domestic law have lesser discretion in interpretation than judges under international law. Probably you have in mind uncertainty in international law, the fluid nature of international law, or any other factor. But please remember, under international law, parties have a right to tell judges what law must be applied. That authority does not exist under domestic law. Under international law, the states tell the court which law need to be applied. I am not talking of arbitration. I am talking of general litigation. In fact, in their compromise that they submit to the World Court by special agreement, for instance, they tell under which law they want their dispute to be decided by the court. And moreover, please remember, under Article 38, the ICJ has no authority to apply equity as a source of law, ex equo ad bono, unless parties authorize the court to refer to equity, justice and good conscience as a source of law. That's not the case with domestic courts. So, considering these aspects, I would like you to revisit your position, but we appreciate that you have brought a new argument.
For equity, read a case by Supreme Court of India, Bhagirath versus State of Delhi.
So don'ts in international law are more than don'ts under domestic law in matters of interpretation and application of law. Under domestic law, you don't make reservation to law. Under international law, you can make reservation to that very treaty that is applicable to you. That's the difference. So I find judges of international tribunals more constant in applying international law than judges at the domestic level. And when they hold lesser constraint in applying law, obviously that implies that they have greater freedom of interpretation. But this is general impression. We wish to learn through more reading on the cases that we bring to our notice. Maybe some examples where you find judges having lesser freedom under domestic law than judges having more freedom under international law. They want to have more freedom, but unfortunately they don't have. And the reason for that is every international court, every international tribunal, every international adjudicatory body is an institution of limited jurisdiction. Limited. And those limitations are very pronounced ones. Very well pronounced limitations. Rationem materi, rationem personae, rationem temporis, and what more. That's the reason they feel very constant under international law. Domestic judges behave like God. By temperament, they also behave like very intimidating. Unlike international judges, they are not so intimidating. I'm telling them because I know both. I have lesser amount of difficulty in handling and dealing with an international judge because there is no protocol. He is meeting you like gentle person. On the other hand, when you meet the judge of local courts, you don't know which protocol need to be respected now. By temperament, they think they are lawgiver. 141 does not exist at the international level. 141 exists at the domestic level. You know 141 what I am talking about? You know 141? People from Bangladesh? 141 is Article 141 of the Constitution of India.
Law of Supreme Court is binding on.
Yeah, I'm sure you must be having the same provision under your Constitution. And Sri Lanka also. Read your Constitution. The counterpart of Article 141 of the Constitution of India. They are just lawmakers. Judges of the World Court are not lawmakers.
Article 111. Article 111. President.
Yes,
Triple 111.
Yes, sir.
And with 51, where the decisions pronounced by the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka are treated as the law of the land. Is it? Yeah. There is no provision of that kind under international. They are not lawmakers. So, given these kind of constraints, I would certainly like you to reflect and then again get back to us. And don't give up your argument because we have made different points of view. That means that you should give up your position, hold your position, and try to review your own position and then get back to us. It's quite possible that something may come out which may not have come to our notice earlier. I'm very keen to find out those leading cases you may discover, which can be cited as leading cases on the law of interpretation under domestic law.
Thank you. All right. So we have seen the text of Article 32 of the Vienna Convention, that is captioned as supplementary means of interpretation. Now we will look at the examples of Article 32 and domestic law examples which we find to be relevant. Now here was a case, we will follow this structure that first we will see the case. For instance, this is a case, as we said and we repeated, Article 31 as a supplementary means is to be resorted to in two situations where Article 31 interpretation is agreeable without problem, and 32 is actually supplementary because this is merely to confirm as to what has already been arrived at by reference to 31, which is confirmation of the Article 31 meaning. And here we employ concluding circumstances. Now here was this case, we have not studied this subject, so I will have to give you a little background. This was a case, a WTO case against European communities. Very quickly and very, you see, in a very layman's term, you know that a number of products are exported and imported. Importing country imposes some taxes, that is called tariffs. Now, tariffs would differ if you categorize a product as a different. Let me give you an example. If you have agreed 10% tariffs on cotton shirts and 11% tariffs on non-cotton shirts. Now, if you consider a shirt to be a non-cotton shirt, if it has got 37% viscose and 67% polyester, you would succeed in imposing 11% tariffs. That is the whole point. So in other words, a different tariff is permissible if the product is considered to be different. Put it contrarily, the same tariff is bound to be applied unless otherwise exempted from this obligation under RTAs or some other justifications, because there is a most favored nation treatment principle would apply. Now in this particular case, the question was of certain computer products, local area network products, LAN products. The question was how to actually decide these products. And appellate body, you see, had a problem, you see, in doing it by reference to Article 31. Because Article 31, as you have seen it, is on general rule. What is general rule? Very simple. Text, context, object and purpose, subsequent practice is special meaning. To put it very broadly, this is general rule. Now here is computer products. I mean, local area net computer itself is something very new. Language is much older. How to find out context of a LAN product is very different, because this is a physical product. Whether it is a pen drive or some, you can see all these things. I mean, it's very difficult to translate these mechanical things into Article 31. So appellate body said, well, 31 will not be very helpful because it's a technical matter. Just try and find out how was this being treated at the time when European communities negotiated the last round of trade negotiations. What was the existing law? Then they must have computers, so they must be treating these products. And look at the importance of this. If you are confronted with something absolutely new and you find no guidance, obviously instinctively say, all right, please tell us, how do you do it? How did you do it yesterday? tell us. And they found something relevant. And that was European Community's legislation on customs classification of goods. That was to be considered as relevant, you see, circumstance for determining whether tariff treatment of LAN products, equipments, multimedia PCs was in conformity with the tariff commitments contained in the schedule. So that is found to be very relevant. So here is an example. Here is an example where Article 31 meaning was not helpful because the product was such that the terminology which is stated in Article 31 upon its application to the product in question did not solve the problem. Therefore, the appellate body allowed a reference to Article 32, and through Article 32 the existing manner in which EC was dealing with treating these LAN products, and that was relevant circumstance. And after having seen it, appellate body concluded, yes, appellate body, European Communities was using it as a LAN product in the manner in which it is contained in its schedule. The schedule is a country's undertaking that it will treat a particular product as this product, because that is very important. For instance, if you have agreed that if you treat 67% viscose content in a cotton shirt as a non-cotton shirt, then tomorrow you can't say that I will treat it as a cotton shirt because viscose is an offshoot of cotton. Tomorrow you can't have it because it is contained in your schedule, binding schedule. So if you have undertaken this, then you are bound to apply. So this was a very good example of employing Article 32, concluding circumstances, which means circumstances of conclusion of tariff schedules of European Communities. Schedules are part of the treaty. So whatever is a tariff schedule, it is part of treaty. And we have seen it when we discuss forms of treaties and forms of legislations. So here again you can see it. Now, second mandate of Article 32 is to determine the meaning. Here is a confirmation of meaning, EC, and second circumstance is to determine the meaning when the meaning given by Article 31 is ambiguous or obscure. Now you have an example of ambiguity of Article 31 meaning. What is ambiguity? Sometimes there is lot of ambiguity about ambiguity. But that is sometimes, not always. Put it conversely, it is always not possible and necessarily to say what is ambiguous. Sometimes it is. And the example is bank. It may be a river bank, it may be a commercial bank. If you see in isolation, if the word bank is neither preceded nor followed by anything, can you tell us what is this bank? Is it possible for you to say surely which bank are we referring to? It is not possible. And that is, you see, this again corroborates that words have meaning in the context in which they appear. Dictionary won't tell you. Dictionary will tell you both a river bank and a commercial bank. So in other words, this term, you see, unless there is something which precedes or follows, is ambiguous. It won't tell you. So here is one circumstance in isolation. But when you see it in a context, something which is written before and after, then you will be able to. If, for instance, say we have to deposit some money in bank, obviously, no sane person would say, well, this is a river bank. So it is not that words are inherently ambiguous. Yes, words have meaning in a context. Otherwise, they may not always give you a meaning. Some words have more than one meaning. Then there is a possibility of what is called vagueness. But the Vienna Convention uses the term obscure, obscurity. But obscurity has been most often taken in the literature as a vagueness. And vagueness you have to be little careful in understanding, as distinguished from ambiguity. Vagueness means that there is the existence of more than one meaning. And there is no certainty as to which meaning is to be preferred. In the case of vagueness, there is a range of meanings. You may adopt any meaning, for instance, elder. Now just try and understand. Compare it. Compare it with man. Elder, how many meanings? Several meanings. Anybody who was born just before, how many minutes, that is immaterial, becomes your elder. But a statue may say, for instance, if you go to a railway reservation counter will say, well, if you are above 62, then you are elder. Because that makes a difference. Otherwise, the same tariff is to be charged. So you have range. Or sometimes you say elder means all LLM students, you may not have born exactly at the same time. But your next year students, they are elders. Seniors. Elder means seniors. So the point is this, you look at it. If you compare it with Banff, you will find that the word elder has number of meanings. Is still another category, the rarest of rare cases. You know, in the context in which this particular phrase is used, Indian students, I am sure, aware of it. But look at it. This is even more vague than the word elder. One murder, another murder, yet another murder, yet another murder. Murder with dacoity, murder with rape, murder in the form whether you just fire one shot, whether you kill, and whether you make one piece or two pieces, whether you put in, oven. No. It is very difficult to put this particular category. The rarest of rares. It is very difficult. Even if you make 10, give you 10 meanings, that the 10 meanings would themselves will not be so. So this particular term, these terms are called vague. Vague terms basically are those terms which have a range of meanings, and legislature sometimes uses these terms in order to give the interpreter a flexibility which they require to suit the particular facts of a case to the truth. So this is basically a vague, these are vague the expressions. I told you the other day, take appropriate action. Come to the class in time. In time. Class starts at 3 o'clock. You may come any time before 3 o'clock or by 3 o'clock. 2:59, 2:58, 2:57, 2:45. All are in time. But if you say you come at 2:59, then it is not vague, it becomes precise. So expression in time, come appropriate time, come timely, expressions like appropriate, due course, timely, these are basically vague expressions. They are not ambiguous expressions. Ambiguous expressions in which it is difficult to choose between the two. You need more aids, more sources, further text, further references in order to understand. Now, further, for instance, examples of absurdity or unreasonableness. We have seen ambiguity, we have seen vagueness, now you see absurdity and unreasonableness. What can be absurd and unreasonable? Imagine there is a legislation which says bringing dogs to a restaurant is a punishable offence or is prohibited. Can you ask a question whether bringing cats to a restaurant is permissible? Okay, let me argue this. You are all unique. Of much younger generations, you may have very fertile and imaginative answers. There is a legislation which says bringing dogs to a restaurant is prohibited. Now the question to you is whether bringing cats to a restaurant should be prohibited under that particular treaty or permissible. Or it should be the same. If dogs are prohibited, cats must also be prohibited. It's so difficult.
About cats, they have soft corners. Girls particularly have soft corner about cats. And I just want to see the psychological aspect of it. Whether you love cats more or you love dogs more. Which pet would you like to prefer, cat or dog? Dog. Very.
So if you say dogs are prohibited, you would certainly quote that cats must also be.
Yeah, if her pet is dog, then if cat is allowed, then why not?
Okay, let me ask a question. I mean, do you think that there should be an objective answer to this, or this is a case which is susceptible to subjective answers? Okay, you need not answer, you think about it. Another case. There's an ordinance that says no person may bring a vehicle into the park apply to an ambulance that enters the park to save a person's life. Look at it. There is a park, South Asian University Park, and it says nobody may bring a vehicle to this park. Some students are playing, and suddenly some student is hit and he is to be hospitalized immediately, otherwise in time. Somebody has made a phone call and an ambulance came and straight away entered. You see the park in order to put the person into the cab and then ambulance and take to the hospital. Now, bringing this ambulance to the park is prohibited because it is a vehicle. Isn't it a vehicle? Ambulance is not a vehicle. So, vehicle is prohibited.
Vehicle is prohibited, but ambulance is exempt. It's a similar situation in traffic rules also. If it is ambulance, okay, everybody is exempted from.
Traffic rules are for ambulance also. Can ambulance kill a person or not? Rash negligent cuts, right? Law of rash negligent driving applies to ambulance also. Otherwise, I will drive only ambulance. Yeah, to reach my destination early, I will have ambulance only. All people who go to their offices in Delhi will have ambulance. Because law of rush and negligence will not
apply. You see, the point is that we study these in the category of absurdity or unreasonableness. Put it conversely. Unless you should be able to distinguish these cases on the basis of reason, they are presumed to be absurd. Let me be more concrete. It is absurd to allow cats where dogs are prohibited in the absence of a reason. Or it would be absurd. Second case. To prohibit an ambulance that enters a park where vehicles are prohibited to save a life of a person would be absurd and would be prohibited if accompanied by a reason. So you have to give a reason why must you prohibit an ambulance also, because this is certainly a vehicle. Put it conversely, you have to give a reason why cats must be allowed Because notwithstanding the fact that both are animals, only one animal is prohibited where other is not. You have to give a reason. In the absence of your being able to give a reason, the distinction would be absurd. You have to prohibit both. Or in the second case, you have to allow ambiguity. This is basically the concept of absurdity or non-reasonableness. That is why these examples are given. Now let us see the example, which are actual examples. Let me give you the context. Now in this particular case, there was a legislation which said anybody who would prohibit the circulation of mail, that means post letters, would be prosecuted. Now there was a postman who was charged of a felony and he was detained by the police. Can you say that by detaining a postman, the prosecution, the police had committed the offence of stopping mail? That is the case. That was the legislation, and this is a decision by the Supreme Court where you see the gist of the finding. The court said the general terms should be so limited in their application as not to lead to injustice, oppression, or to an absurd consequences. Just the example that Professor Tyagi was giving a while ago. If you say that postman should be, since the postman is carrying mails, and if we stop with postman, mails would be detained. In other words, it is to say that postmen are allowed to commit murders. And they have a license not to be stopped by the police because they are carrying letters. Isn't it be unreasonable, absurd? So in order to commit murders, you better get a job of a policeman and then you commit murders.
Sir, I think there is a provision in advocates, and that if the advocate is going for his official work to his court, he should not be stopped between. That is in advocates' right.
So does it mean that advocate is allowed to commit murder? Absolutely not. You see the argument.
How do you justify it?
I tell you, the justification is this. It means an ordinary justification. You can't stop him. You must have, you see, a justification. And justification is this: Advocate Act doesn't say that the provisions of Advocates Act shall prevail over other legislations. For instance, Indian Penal Code. Does it say? I am not aware that it says. It doesn't say. You find, wherever you find these saving clauses, they are saved. For instance, Right to Information Act, Official Secrets Act, for instance, is saved. My question to you is, does the Advocate Act 61 say that the provisions of Indian Penal Code, that's it. The same as this. If you say that by stopping a person, that is a postman, who is charged of a felony, would be necessarily a violation of the Act because he was carrying letters, the consequence would be that postmen would be allowed to commit murders. Or similarly, as Professor Tyagi was saying, you drive an ambulance and then you are exempted from rash and negligent driving because the argument is you are carrying patients or you are going to take patients who would otherwise die. So therefore, you have a right to drive negligently, or you don't consider the consequence of your driving. You see, there is a possibility how it is to be. There is a possibility, there is the provision of siren. That is where it balances. So it actually sounds you that here is a vehicle, so be careful, give way. That is how it is balanced. Not that ambulance or fire brigade attendants, they are allowed to do this. Or sometimes I have seen fire brigade attendants. I mean, sometimes there is a very serious fire and then traffic is stopped on the roads, and by special arrangement, traffic is stopped, the policeman would come manually regulating, irrespective of the light, he would come manually saying, okay, you stop and allow these days. This is how they do it. But while you are on the way, and where there is no possibility of further regulating, you are not allowed to hit other cars and on the pretext that you are going to save the lives of many people. You can't do that. So this is basically what the Supreme Court is saying. To say that by stopping a postman for investigation, it would be a stoppage of mails, would be an unreasonable or an absurd consequence. So when the legislature is adopting these kinds of languages, then there is an inbuilt exceptions. And for instance, when the legislature had adopted this court advocate should not be prevented, it intended that the advocate, you see, would be decent enough to stop and give time to investigating authorities if he had committed a murder. He may say that, well, here is my license, let me tell you, exception. Some incident had taken place where you are residing and you happen to be an advocate. At the time when you left your residence, there was nobody, you see, to investigate. When you reached ITO or when you reached somewhere, and then police people came, you said, fine, I am so and so advocate, this is my license number, you note it down, my chamber number is this and this, I have a matter at 10:30 and I am going, and then either you tell me where I should come or you should come there. All right. This is what you are supposed to do. Because you are an advocate, you are supposed to help the law enforcement authorities. That is it. So you, or contrarily speaking, if you don't say that, who are you to stop me? I am an advocate, whatever I would like to do, I do that. There is a provision in the Advocates Act. You know what the policeman is going to say? Advocate Act is not to be cited at ITO. The place to cite Advocates Act is the pleadings. And they are not submitted to a policeman. They are submitted to a court. That is the case. And that is the reason why law also protects an adverse possession. Because whatever you want to say, only you say it somewhere else. You can't say there. You can't fight. So that is the whole case. So if you really want to respect your law as an advocate, you give them details. They're fine. You're most welcome. You come there. Not that when the Act says, it is basically, why did the Advocate Act, there is a provision? Provision is because you are representing the interest of somebody. By stopping the advocate, the interest of a client, an innocent person, would be defeated. That is the reason that you are given this immunity. And immunities are of several kinds. I mean, we have seen Pinochet case and we will discuss immunities. Immunities are number of functional immunities, immunities by status, the number of immunities available. Let us see another case. Absurdity and unreasonable is another case. This is a case I thought I should discuss with you in the context of black money. Have you seen this case? And that is why I told you, even during my talk, series of lectures, any relevant and anything new that I would come up, I would definitely include. And this is the first opportunity that I have discussing with you this. You are aware in the context that you see Mr. Jaitley and the Attorney General, they took the position that they have this Article 26 of this Indo-German treaty which allows them to prohibit, to conceal the names of these people, because otherwise, first of all, they will not like it. It will be a violation, they said, of their commitment. They also said, Attorney General also said one day on the television that they will have to further negotiate a treaty with the United States in the coming December, and they will again have to give this undertaking of secrecy to their counterparts. Otherwise, they will not sign this treaty. Now, in this context, Supreme Court made a very, very important observation. The observation was this. You have a treaty signed by the executive of this country. You also have a constitution of this country which restricts the powers of the executive. Now let us see, can an executive be allowed to sign a treaty to violate constitutional provisions? Supreme Court said no. And we can't read this treaty like this. Even if you have signed it, we don't read it. And it can't be read as such. They said it that all these names of account holders, they can be disclosed only in an investigation concerning tax matters. The Supreme Court is saying there is no such restriction because there are two clauses in the treaty, Article 26. There are two different sections, two different sentences. First sentence talks about tax matters. The second sentence does not talk about tax matters. It only says public court hearings. A public court hearing does not necessarily and always mean a tax matter hearing. Court is far more comprehensive a nomenclature than the matter that many courts deal with. Certainly, courts deal also with tax matters. But by dealing with tax matters, Delhi High Court deals tax matters. It doesn't become tax tribunal. Public court hearing. So the Supreme Court said we can't interpret it. First of all, it said it. We employ Vienna Convention, and by employing Vienna Convention, this is an ordinary meaning. The second Supreme Court said it, even if we don't apply Vienna Convention, to say that a public court hearing necessarily means a tax hearing is absurd. You can't adopt this absurd interpretation. That is what the court said. It is a very, very important observation by the Indian Supreme Court in this black money case. Very good. Judgment ordered by the Supreme Court of 4 July 2011. So here is this example of absurdity. Then, example of ambiguity or obscurity, preparatory work. Earlier we have seen the example on unreasonableness. Now you see preparatory work. How preparatory work is to resolve ambiguity. And here you have the classic case of Pepper versus Hart. This is an all-time great case from common law. The case itself is an authority. You need not say what is on if you are aware of this case. But another difficulty in this case is unless you read this case more than once, you will not be able to understand it. Because this is a tax case and facts are too many, very complex facts. A brief summary of this is this. You see, there were 9 schoolmasters whose children had to be educated. And they had a right to get the education of these children at concessionary fee. The school in which they were admitted was not full to capacity. The tax authority said, you are liable to the same treatment. You are getting the same benefits. You are getting the same concession as you would have got if the school had been full to capacity. These schoolmasters said, since the school is not full to capacity, the school did not lose any fee in order to get admission to our 9 children. So therefore, there was no benefit to us that is taxable. There would have been a tax benefit if their school had been full to capacity and the school had to terminate, forego the admission of 9 students in order to accommodate our wards. That was the whole issue. The issue was whether admission of 9 children, 9 students to a school which was not full to capacity was a benefit to their fathers, their parents, or not. If it was a benefit, it was taxable. If it was not benefit, it was not taxable. The problem was the House of Lords in a classic decision was not able to dispose this question off by reference to normal rules of interpretation. The House of Lords had to rely on Hansard. Hansard is a term that is used in British history or parliamentary history. Hansard, H-A-N-S-A-R-D, H capital. That is a usage, but normal English term is parliamentary history. by relying on parliamentary history, House of Lords decided in favor of the schoolmasters, saying that there was no benefit. And if there was no benefit, it was not taxable. That was the whole issue in this particular. Very complex issue. Very complex case. But it's a classic. There is no better case in the English-speaking world on parliamentary history in domestic law. Then you have preparatory work. You have an international case from WTO. Here was a case on trade in services. In this particular case, this was a case between United States and Antigua. The United States did not allow access to gambling services because United States believed these services to be bad. That is presumption. I read it from the readings of the United States. But whether or not you treated these services to be bad, but these services were not freely accessible into the United States. This was complained against as being contrary to United States WTO obligations. And then the question of interpretation of Article 16, paragraph 2, subparagraph C of the GATS agreement came before the WTO tribunal. WTO tribunal expressly admitted ambiguity. WTO tribunal, after applying Article 31, said it, well, we are unable to, decide whether these gambling services are prohibited or not. To put it precisely. Then, but WTO tribunal also said it. It is not that we have only Article 31 rule. We have also Article 32 rule. And 32 rule, 32 means, supplementary means, also talks about preparatory work. Let us see the preparatory work, what the parties had intended during the negotiations of GATS. And after reference to preparatory work, it was considered to be 1993 schedule guidelines as preparatory work. Same schedules as in the computer equipment. So WTO appellate body said these schedules, the manner in which countries had agreed on what services to be included, this is a proper guideline, and we have no doubt about gambling services to be included. And ultimately, the appellate body also found the United States to be in violation. So here is an example. If supplementary means were not available, appellate body really had difficulty in determining the violation of the United States obligation. Decisive reliance was placed by and I told you the guidelines. Here is an example of guidelines that we were referring to. Then you see historical circumstances as far as absurdity or unreasonableness is concerned. You see, here is a case of jurisdiction, as you see Professor Tyagi is also talking about. The jurisdiction of international courts is consensual. Most of the disputes are disposed of at the level of jurisdiction. There is no compulsory jurisdiction of the court apart from what parties themselves have conferred on the court. There is no such consent on the domestic plane, except in the cases of arbitration. There is a compulsory jurisdiction. You can't choose a tribunal, you can't choose a law. These are typical, these are very ordinary things before international court. Very usual. This is highly unusual, nobody thinks about it. Now in this particular case, the issue was United States, in this particular case, pleaded that all agreements, all treaties you see signed by Iran are the subject matter of the court's declaration, court's jurisdiction. But the International Court of Justice did not agree. But the International Court of Justice could do it not on the basis of Article 31. Article 31 did not help. Only on the basis of historical circumstances could the International Court conclude that Iran was right, that Iran had conferred on the court its jurisdiction, its acceptance of jurisdiction with respect to treaties signed subsequent to the declaration of acceptance of court's jurisdiction. Iran said, I accept court's jurisdiction on treaties signed after depositing this declaration of conferment of jurisdiction, not any treaties which were prior to this. United States saying, once you have signed a declaration, which means any treaty to which you are a party. ICJ gave this opinion, said no, we agree with Iran. And ICJ agreed it only on the basis of historical circumstance. You know what was the most important historical circumstance? Most important historical circumstance was that in the absence of signing this declaration, Iran was contesting the jurisdiction of ICJ. So wouldn't it be absurd that something you have always been, you see, contesting, and after you sign a declaration of acceptance, then you say by signing this, all existing treaties are also included. If had it been the case, what would be the necessity of signing, you see, of declaration as to the existing treaties? As to subsequent treaties, one can imagine. So therefore, ICJ said no. If you had been always, contesting the jurisdiction of ICJ with respect to existing treaties, we would read your declaration as to the conferring jurisdiction only as to those treaties which are signed subsequent to depositing this particular declaration of acceptance of court's jurisdiction. Let us see, you see, few conclusions which would necessarily follow. One is that the general rule of treaty interpretation is not always or necessarily sufficient to confirm or determine the meaning of an interpretive text. Because supplementary means, very clearly it says, for two purposes, either to confirm or to determine. Confirmation means what is all right, which is neither absurd nor unreasonable, that's fine. But even if you need to confirm it. In the case when it is problematic, absurd, unreasonable, then you have to determine on the basis of supplementary. The second conclusion is the supplementary means to confirm or determine the meaning of an interpretive text are expressly not finite or immutable. Preparatory work and concluding circumstances are only indicative, are only expressly stated supplementary means. There can be more than these. Because these are supplementary, there can be any other thing which the court believes to be supplementary. There is no exhaustive list. Vienna Convention is not saying that only these two means are supplementary. Yes, these two are expressly stated. Whereas the category of supplementary means is broader than its two expressly stated manifestations. Thirdly, interpretation of a legal text is not wholly subject to rules. This conclusion is to be taken with a pinch of salt. Technically, not generally. Why? Because only Article 31 is captioned as rule. Article 32 is not captioned as rule. It is captioned as needs. And Article 32 is also about interpretation. And therefore, it is possible to say that interpretation is not always subject to rules, that means always subject to Article 31. 32 is also important. And it is important in either of the two ways, either to confirm 31 meaning or to determine the meaning when 31 meaning is absurd or unreal. That is all what I had to say, and you did not get a break, so you have complimentary 10 minutes either to take a break, that means until the next class, or to ask questions and still engage in discussions. I am available for next 10 minutes. My next class is at 6 o'clock, not before that. So you're most welcome to, you see, now you can pick up any point of discussion and clarification. Any point, you're most welcome to pick up any point. Of my own, I have nothing more to say. You give them the mic, they might like to elaborate, add or comment on what we have said. Read this treaty, that is the German tax 26 treaty, that is this one. This Indo-German agreement, double taxation agreement. Read this article 26. This is very good because this particular, this is there in the news, so you will get the interest. This is available freely on the internet, very easily available from the Government of India website, Ministry of Finance. This treaty is available. Then you can take your position between what the government was saying and what the Supreme Court was saying. And you can also see that the Supreme Court of India, after having stating that this treaty is one to which India is not a party, nevertheless this is a treaty, as is correct, incorporates customary international law which is otherwise binding on states, and Supreme Court of India relied on Article 31. And saying that we can't read this provision in such a manner which is manifestly absurd, that citizens of this country should be deprived of any information despite the fact that you have provisions like Article 32 of the Constitution, you have provisions like Article 19 of the Constitution, you have provisions like Right to Information Act, and still you can say that we will not give any information. And don't forget, this is a case filed by none other than Mr. Ram Jethmalani. If the Government of India could say to this person, then we won't give you information, and they did not give any information to them. It is only after this that they gave information. And this is 2011, Right to Information Act came into force on 15th June 2005, if I can remember. And prior to that, Article 19 existed, it still exists. How do you exercise your fundamental rights, several fundamental rights? In the absence of certain information, the government should come out with exceptions. You have Article, Section 8 and 9 of Right to Information Act. If you really want to exempt information, you have a right to do so, provided you cite which. Why do you want to exempt this information? So this is very interesting. And even more interesting was this, that first the government went to the court saying that we will not give any information because this is exempted. The government filed an application before the Supreme Court, 3 judges, saying that you pass an order, amend this order. Do you know this? This was very, very, very funny. The government went to the Supreme Court filing an application saying that you amend this order. They said we will not delete a single word. And when the Supreme Court said we will not delete a single word, you give information, you disclose names, then what the government says in the evening. We have already given this list to SIT on 27th of June. What are you trying to make? When you lost the case, then you are trying to save your face. SIT is so sacrosanct. You see, look at the absurdity. You are all law students. And our Honorable Finance Minister is a senior advocate. Look at the absurdity. Sitting Supreme Court judges are less sacrosanct when they are forming Supreme Court of a country. And a committee which is composed of retired judges is more sacrosanct because they can have access to names, but not the Supreme Court. First. Second absurdity. SIT is a product of Supreme Court. Look at this funny. You know why did they do so? Why were they trying to do so? The reason is very simple. And the reason is this. Supreme Court is a court. SIT is not a court. Conversely, Supreme Court is a supervisory authority under the order by which it constituted SIT. And SIT, I is most important, investigation. Because on this basis of I, charge sheets would be prepared. And these all functions are executive functions. So they thought if they would reveal the names in advance to Supreme Court, the possibilities of manipulations would be reduced, if not gone completely. That is the reason they disclosed it to these people, whom they can, but not to those whom they can't. So you have this. Well, of course, these things you have to cull out. That is why you have to read these statements, these things very carefully and read each and every word. But this is a judgment which I must compliment Justice Sudarshan Reddy and one more judge, B.V. Singhvi, 2011, division bench, which ordered this. Very beautifully written order. Very harsh, very sharp order written. And the three judges said, forget about amending our order. We won't delete a single word. And tomorrow morning you come, Supreme Court gave them less than 15 hours. They said, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, you should give us this list. But for you as a law student, Article 26 is, believe me, read just as a small paragraph, but I think it is worth reading.